Hello and welcome. You're listening to CIH Futures Guide to the Housing Sector. Futures is the Chartered Institute of Housing's network for young professionals in the housing sector. In this podcast series, we introduce and explore key topics and issues facing the sector today and how you can get involved. To find out more about Futures and what the CIH can do for you, you can visit cih.org.
Hello and welcome to the CIH Futures podcast. My name is Luke Denton, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about an incredibly important subject, and that is equality, diversity and inclusion, or EDI. EDI represents a fundamental challenge to many sectors, and the housing sector is no exception. Housing organisations have a duty not only to their staff members to provide opportunities and support, but also to its tenants and residents, ensuring that their voice is amplified regardless of their race, gender, sexuality, or disability status. On today's episode, I'm joined by three incredible guests, and I've underlined incredible in my notes because I'm so excited to have you all on here today, who will guide us through EDI. We will learn about what it is, the challenges the sector faces, the organisations that are leading us through, and finally, what you can do as a young person to contribute. So let's get started with a bit of an introduction. First up, we've got Noreen Pascal from the Housing Diversity Network. Hello, Noreen, how are you?
Hi there, Luke. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Next up, we've got Callum Chomczuk, for the National Director at CIH Scotland and Chair of the internal CIH EDI Group. Hello, Callum, how are you?
Hi, Luke, I'm good, thanks. Thank you.
Good. And finally, we've got Victor de Cunha, Chief Executive at Curo and on the NatFed EDI board. Hello, Victor, how are you?
I'm not sure it's a board, but I'm here.
Okay.
It's a national group, yeah. But hi, how you doing?
Good. All right, well, we'll kick off. And I was hoping that you could all tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you got into housing, your career path, and then what equality, diversity and inclusion means to you. We'll kickstart with Maureen. So take it away.
Thank you, Luke. How did I get into housing? Out of all the three guests, I think I'm probably the least housing, with the least housing background, in the sense that, of course, I have a day job with Housing Diversity Network. I started off in housing in North London, Haringey Council. That was my actual first job after graduating, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something that impacted people's lives and has something to do with politics. So I did start off there, but I soon moved away from sort of frontline work to looking at the people who work in housing. So within a couple of years, I had the opportunity to train up to be involved in workforce development. And I found that I preferred working in that environment rather than upfront with customers and tenants, not because I don't like tenants and customers. I think I get emotionally involved, so it was probably best I stayed in workforce development, and that's the sort of dotted line to Housing Diversity Network. I moved out of housing into the voluntary community sector, I work for Business Link, other public sector bodies, but find myself here, and latterly I've become a board member of social housing. So yes, I'm in housing now, but I haven't had a 30-year career in housing in a sort of traditional way. So I think that tells you a little bit about why I'm involved in this work, because there's two things I personally want to help achieve, and that is to change the face of people who are in charge of housing. Sounds a bit very ambitious, and I know I can't do that alone, but Housing Diversity Network makes a contribution in that area. And I think the link between the people who are servicing tenants and residents in communities and those people themselves has to be a much direct line. And sometimes I feel it's not very straight, it's crooked, there's bits missing, as if what we're delivering in-house has nothing to do with the people who are going to receive the service. I have no idea if I've gone off tangent, Luke.
No, I want you to keep going, please.
So that's why. So as far as Housing Diversity Network is concerned, I've been with them 6 years, and I will loosely divide the work up into improving practice in housing, this is my words, I think Housing Diversity is one of those organisations who represent the conscience of the sector, because we have the privilege of focusing on EDI. That's why we exist. And then the other side of it is to, so improving practice, the other side is to support individuals in terms of their career. So you've mentioned that Futures is all about, I guess, in a way, supporting people to make a career in housing, and despite any challenges, to help them to keep going. Because I'm not going to lie and say that it's, we know exactly what we're doing in housing when it comes to EDI, staff development, workforce development. We know we have an issue around leadership, and it hasn't changed that much in the last 20 odd years. A little bit in some areas, but there's still an issue there. And for me, if there's an issue there, there's going to be an issue with how we look at our tenants and staff, tenants and residents. And staff are your key asset to helping bridge that gap. So who you employ and who you recruit and who works in housing is dead serious. So that's why we help with that. And then finally, the other bit is to improve practice. So we've got the board trainee programme, and that's about supporting people from non-traditional backgrounds into board membership. And we're in our 4th year of doing that. We have regional diversity groups that exist to support those who lead EDI in social housing organisations. They need support as well, and we provide these regional diversity groups. We also help the organisation to look at itself holistically, and we have something called the Quality Mark Assessment, which measures how your EDI journey is going and leaves you with a kind of plan, if it's not going that well, as to what you can do about it. So I'll stop there because there are other people in the room. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the job that I'm doing and how I got there.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate that. That's a lot of things to take away there. I certainly relate to the coming out of uni as a graduate and going into a job straight away that I felt like I needed to impact people, and housing certainly provides that, doesn't it? Thank you. We'll move on to Victor. I was looking at the Cura website earlier, and there was a quote that really stood out to me. It was from Stephen Covey: "Strength lies in differences, not similarities." And that really spoke to me, because I think the conversation's changed a little bit in recent years. I think a lot of people beforehand would say, I don't see colour, or I don't see differences. But I think the important thing to do is to see differences and respect them. And I think we're reclaiming that again. But anyway, sorry, that was just me going off on a tangent. But Victor, tell us a bit about yourself.
We could start a whole conversation on that one. Absolutely. I think everyone's thinking has definitely evolved around what inclusion really means and the importance of uniqueness and difference and lived experiences. So my story starts a long time ago, 1971. When my mum and dad did something remarkable. They decided they were going to emigrate to another country. For another reason, they wanted to give their children something that they never had, which was an education and the chance to be able to stand on a street corner and talk to more than 2 people and have a career, stuff that probably we all take for granted. It's probably a bit taboo now. There were economic migrants. It's not a cool thing anymore. But after several generations of a dictatorship in Portugal, they didn't want my sister and I to go through the same thing. So fast forward a few months after they'd come, their plan had hit the realities of they couldn't be without their children. And my first experience of the UK was private rented in South London. And a lot of things have changed, but actually there's still quite a lot of things that need to be improved in private rented in this country, the standards and all sorts of things. And there is many stories I could tell you about my experiences from moving from one private rented place to another. But what I'll tell you is this: is every time they had a bump on the road with their housing, the Portuguese community would say to my mum and dad, "What you need to do is get yourself on a council list." And they did. They went down to Brixton Town Hall and they put themselves down on a waiting list. And 3 years later, we were offered a property in the Oval, looking at the cricket ground. And that property transformed our family lives. It really did. Mum and dad stopped having to have different jobs in different places. I didn't have to go different schools, and life then became more stable, and it became more. You know, still worked hard, you know. They still went at 6 in the morning and came home at 8 at night, but it became a lot more stable as a family home, you know. There was a room just for the telly, you know, it was remarkable. Never seen anything like that before. You'd always have to go and stay in mum and dad's room to watch the telly. So imagine a world where 20 years later, I accidentally fell into social housing. I applied for a job in Brent Council and it just said business manager job. And I just finished an HND, sorry, in business management, and it happened to be in Brent Council, and I just fell in love. What a joyful thing to do, to give everyone the same chance that mum and dad and my sister and I had. And I fell in love, and it was 30 years ago, and I still love it to this day. And we don't work in Disneyland. This is quite a hard job because it involves emotions and people, and we let people down. And if you don't love this job, it can really get to you. But also, if you love this joy, you will be enormously rewarded with the joy you put into people's lives the moment you give them that key. So for me, that's how I'm here and why I'm here and will always be here. And whilst I get paid well as a chief executive of a housing association all these years later, I probably would do it for free, if the truth be told. Because this is more than a job. It gives me a sense of fulfillment. I feel complete when I do it, and it makes the bad days fine, knowing that it matters. It really matters. And by the same token, why is EDI? And yesterday I was chairing the National Housing Federation's annual EDI conference, and one of the speakers said, "Oh, you need to stick a B at the end of that now, which is a belonging, EDIMB, belonging." And it's a nice way to finish that, isn't it? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to create as organisations, a real sense of belonging, no matter who you are. And for me, you know, I've been in this sector long enough to know that we ought to be doing better. You know, we're part of the counterweight to a society that's unjust for many. And so we're supposed to be morally and professionally a beacon of inclusion, because what we do is try to counter systemic racism and unfairness in society. So if we ourselves don't represent the best of society, we're letting ourselves down, we're letting down the sector and letting down those people that we serve. So for me, you know, there's a moral obligation to get this right. And that's played out in what Maureen said around, just look at the leadership. How can that be right? You've got so much diversity in all sorts of ways. The lower down the organizations you get, and then the higher you get, the less and less diverse. There's something wrong there. That can't be right. Because all the research tells you that the more the diverse the leadership, the better your business will be. So how can that even be? Makes no sense to me. And we are community anchors. We're anchored in those little places that need us most. And they are diverse. Because the world is unfair and unjust. They always are diverse. So if we want to be trusted, if we want to be respected, we need to look and sound and have the same lived experiences as those people we serve. Otherwise, it's self-evident. They will look at us on the website and go, they don't look like me. They don't know what I'm going through. They can't possibly have an empathy. So I think for me, you know, there's all those reasons why we have to make this a strategic priority, not just within each of our organizations, but as a sector. And you know, my personal legacy was to make this sector more diverse when I leave it than when I found it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. There was especially, you know, it's when I have these conversations with other housing professionals that it does remind you when you're here, why you're here. You know, it's a challenging role for everybody, but it's these conversations here that just really remind me what I'm here to do. So thank you for sharing. Callum, over to you. If you could tell us a bit about your story and what EDI means to you.
So, I mean, my story is shorter than anybody else's because I've hardly been in the sector. So I only joined the institute and then turned the sector 6 years ago, almost exactly 6 years ago. So I kind of like most people, like fell into it. You know, I think that's the kind of part you choose it or you fall into it. Most people seem to fall into the sector, but just like Maureen and Victor, actually you know, as naive and hopeful as I was maybe 6 years ago, I still have that hope because it's just an incredibly wonderful sector, fully passionate people trying to do their best every single day. The policy and the political and the regulatory environment changes all the time, but actually the commitment from the professionals in the sector to improve things is consistent, and that's the stuff that keeps you going. And my work is mostly with professionals rather than tenants because we kind of work with CIH. So that's the side that I see more of, and people stay in the sector. I think that's the thing that's inspiring, and not because they couldn't get a job elsewhere, but because they're committed to it. And that, it's a huge vote of confidence in the sector. And I genuinely wonder why more people don't want to work in housing, because I think once they learn about it, they're like, actually, it's brilliant. But as good as it isn't perfect. Because we're not perfect. We're human beings. The structures aren't great. Our performance could be better. Our knowledge is imperfect, and I think that's exactly part of the discussion today. Is actually learning reminding ourselves what we don't know, and how do we improve our performance when it comes to ED&I. Because for the CIH particularly, we know we have to be incredibly humble about what we've done and what we haven't done, actually, and where we haven't led. We've got a really privileged position in the sector as a kind of, as a leading body, as a leading membership body, and we haven't used that almost at all now. And what we've tried to do over the last few years is get better at that. We've got a long way to go, and we've got a huge way to go, but we are starting being humble about what can we learn, how can we better understand for our membership, understand the diversity of the whole membership in its broadest possible sense, and how do we grow that? How do we celebrate that? How do we support that? And we are doing things, and the bit that keeps coming back to me is, and I see this amongst other organisations, we always start these things voluntary. As you said, look, I'm the chair of the staff group and linked to the kind of members group. But if we're serious about this, it requires senior leadership and actually requires money. That's the bit that makes I think that makes a change. I think that's unique to housing. I think that's in every sector. We start voluntary, we start to understand what we don't know, but if we're serious about making big changes, it requires investment. And again, that's the bit where I think the Institute are at that kind of tipping point. What do we do here? And I think probably much of the sector is as well.
Thank you, Callum. Just to go back to you, tell us a little bit about what CIH are doing at the moment in relation to EDI and the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, of course, Luke. So as I said, I'm the kind of leader of the the lead of the staff group. But the few things I said is it has to be a bit of humility first. So we didn't know what our membership looked like. We would ask people their age, because you'd get a discount if you're a certain age, old or young, and we'd know your preferred gender, and that was it. We didn't actually have any EDI data. We didn't know disability status, race, religion, sexuality, like socioeconomic, nothing, absolutely nothing. And while we are the kind of professional body, we didn't really know who our members are. So our big focus over the last few years, and it'll be a continuing, ultimately never-ending focus, is to capture that data. We can't demand it from you. We're not going to demand it. It's not conditioned membership. We want you to give it to us so we can understand who you are. And if we have better understanding of what our membership looks like, we can ensure that our response in policy and practice, events, support, meets that. Why are we underrepresented in some areas when it comes to membership and better represented in another part of the country? That's information that can help drive our engagement in our practice. But that itself is quite selfish. That's just about CIH. Actually, I've said we've got a leadership role, so it's about what more can we do. So we've done more modest things like an EDI framework, so guidance for housing organisations and practitioners about how they can make determinations about EDI in themselves when they're actually making business decisions. One of the things we're looking at for the year ahead, and I really regret we didn't do it a year ago during Lara Oyedeli's presidency, but we're looking at guidance for the sector on how to ensure boards and committees are more diverse. Better late than never, but trying to provide some more practical support to the sector as well as being that, much like in that Fed in England and the SFHA in Scotland and every other part of the UK as well, also just being that conduit for good practice and support. Actually, we sit in a really privileged place. There's loads of great stuff happening, but it can happen in isolation. CIH needs to be taking that all together and sharing on that with the sector. We don't need to do everything, but you know what? We can at least kind of like be a broker and put that back out to everybody. So that's a few things we're working on. But again, look, it's like I know nothing. I need to keep learning. I know that push comes from the members, and rightly so. So I'll kind of learn from them about what we can do, and that's then collectively we kind of push the institute on.
Thank you, Callum. And I think what you've said there about learning and gaining knowledge is really important, especially when you said about having the humility to say we don't have this information, we need to get it, we need to understand our membership base. I think that's really important to me. And I think admitting we don't know everything and there's room to improve is something that the sector has been getting better at, but there are certainly steps to go to bridge that gap on that knowledge. In terms of support, Maureen, I know that HDM provides a lot of support to organisations and to people as well in terms of mentoring. Can you tell us a little bit about what else your organisation and just touch on that as well, please?
Yeah, well, yeah, can I touch upon those things in a little bit more detail? Because in terms of education, I couldn't agree more. I think we all have a responsibility to get more educated about some of these issues, personally, but also as a professional and also as part of an organisation. There's a narrative here. Social housing is not new. I mean, it might be new to a younger person just coming in, and that younger person needs to understand the history behind social housing. So we heard a little bit via Victor, and this is what I mean about being clued up. So social housing, like it says on the label, started off with a very strong social purpose in this country, the UK. Politically, it's had to adapt to a different climate and has become much more business-like, and I put that in inverted commas because it kind of assumes that we weren't before then. And even though I haven't stayed in social housing over the last 35 years when the movement really got going, when I was at Hagley Council, that very first job, the people who were attracted to housing were very committed to, they sound a bit like Victor, we were very committed to improving people's lives, and housing was a means to that. Rather than just having a career in housing, it was about, and for me, I was lucky to hear I call them intellectuals. I mean, American, all sorts of people working in this office talking about the bigger purpose of housing. It was intellectual. It was attracting people who felt it in here. And I'm not saying we don't have that, but I am saying in terms of understanding the root of social housing, it's really important to understand how it came about and then why did it splinter off into having a BME Housing Association movement, because there was a recognition, even though you have people with great will, there were people who were being positively discriminated against, and that was within council system, and that's the public sector. So we have this kind of duality of reality. Good people trying to do and get things right, but by the same token, we would get a lot of things wrong as well, even though we're a social organisation. And that's what I mean about education, understanding the roots of our sector, where it's gone and where perhaps it needs to come back. In terms of supporting people with a staff mentoring programme, sounds very simple. People, professionals from all over the country. So HDN is a membership organisation, a bit like CIH, but our members are corporate. By definition, the people who work for those organisations are also members. So as a result of their membership, they can put staff on the staff mentoring programme. And the beauty of that for me is it's not just about the individual's own career development. It is about that. It's also about exposing staff to people from different parts of the country, because we know we have all sorts of prejudices and problems and barriers, north, south, rural, town. There's a lot we have to understand in housing. And on the staff mentoring programme, you can network with people. You could be in London, but network with people based in Cumbria if they're on the programme. You can network with your peer group on the programme. A big part of the programme is understanding the role of housing and the contribution it makes to EDI in terms of the way that we've heard people's lives. The chances are the people who need social housing are probably going to be the most vulnerable, usually, typically, which is why social housing is an EDI issue. And so just using that as an example, staff mentoring programme, it's for individuals and supports individuals, but broadens them out to think about what they can do in their jobs to make that quest for inclusion, diversity and equality something real. And we try and educate people around those things as well as having a career. And it sounds a bit bitter, but I don't mean it in that way. It sounds like there's you, but there's the wider purpose of housing and how do you fit into that. That's what we try and get across.
That sounds brilliant. Thank you. Knowledge is power, isn't it? Is what I'm getting quite a lot from what I'm hearing right now. Knowledge of self, but knowledge of communities. Understanding your roots, understanding your tenants and your tenants' roots and their experiences. Thank you for that. Victor, tell us about your work.
So I guess the work I've been leading most recently that is probably affects most is my work as chair of the National EDI group for the National Housing Federation. So this is really a group of members of the National Housing Federation that have come together to try and support the Federation in its attempt to, as we've distilled it, help the sector's leadership be more diverse and vibrant. Back to the point I made earlier around the characteristics and diversity of senior leaders, whether they're board members or whether they're executives. I mean, that's really what we're there to try and support. And in order to do that, the first thing we did was going back to data. So we supported, I think it's probably the first time we've done this in the sector, the EDI National Data Tool, which we've now run twice, and the data is improving in terms of quality and the numbers of people that participate, organizations, but the dial isn't moving. So whilst we're getting better data, it's not actually showing improvement. Our job, because we can't change other organizations, is to hold up the mirror. It's for the organization to look at their data, compare that, and make decisions. In order to support that, if you go on the National Housing Federation website, there's tons and tons of tools and good practice. It's a bit like Maureen's world. We're there to try and share best practice and give people that are willing and committed the opportunity to implement change. Now, this is like any piece of culture change. It ain't gonna happen overnight, but our job is to be relentlessly playing back to the sector, the progress it has and hasn't made. And we've also introduced what's called the Chair's Challenge, which is, as it suggests, a challenge on all chairs of housing associations in England. And that challenge is for them to lead the change needed at the board table, and that requires them to understand their data. It's data of those they serve, those that they have working alongside them at the board, and also that work within the organization, and then to commit to a vision about how they are going to transform the organization, and then to be held accountable for that. And so far, I think that's a fantastic thing. I don't actually see it as an initiative. I see it as part of good governance, because the code of governance that was refreshed in 2020, NatFed put EDI squarely and firmly in the hands of the board. It was implied, but it was very overtly added, a bit like culture was a very overtly added. And so I see this not as an initiative. I see this as a way of achieving good governance. And only 68, I think, 68, last time I actually bothered to go and read the account, how many of, because they put the organization's names on the website. And last time I did this, all right, it was a couple of weeks ago, it was 68. I have about 500 and can't remember, 30 to 520 members. I mean, it's a shockingly low figure. Enough for me to get worried about why chairs don't think this is important. My chair at Curo signed it, and I have got the privilege of chairing a housing association in East London, which is providing temporary accommodation for homeless families. And the first thing I did is, like, we operate in a really diverse area. It's my job to make sure we are committed to this change, and that I'm held to account and the board is held to account. So those are some of the things that I've been involved with. And ultimately, you know, I've got a view that I can't change the world, but I can definitely use the things I can control and influence to my advantage. I can control the things that happen at Curo, and I can try and influence colleagues and the sector around me. And that's what I'm going.
I don't want to steal Callum's thunder, but I just wanted to introduce another side to what Victor's saying. And that is, even if I'm a board member in a part of the country which is almost like 97% white UK. And so I hear what Victor's saying, and I was nodding my head. But I don't want people listening to this to think that, well, you know, if it's somewhere in the southwest or east of England, which is where I'm referring to, this is not relevant to us. Because the other side of that is diversity is not always visible. Clearly, when it's visible, you have no excuse. When it's not visible, I think you actually have a double sort of duty to check. You know, alongside all the 9 protected characteristics, we have class. Class is an issue in our sector in terms of who's in charge and who the service users are. I think we've got a huge gap there. Disability clearly is another one. But even in the region that I'm representing on one of the boards, it may be, according to the census, like 97.9% white UK. The amazing thing is, when I do tenant complaints, the very first tenant I had was a black woman. And that taught me something about our stereotypes, about what we mean about which areas are diverse and where people are. And I thought, well, there you go. I don't know if that had any impact on her, but it certainly had an impact on me, that you can't think, just because an area is this, that, or the other, you can't assume who's in that area are going to be, you know, who the social tenants are going to be are going to be this. You just can't make that assumption unless you've got your data. So I think it works both ways in terms of definitely ethnicity and visibility. That's why I wanted to interject.
No, thank you. And the class is important. I'm going to quote Angela Davis, but race is class, is gender, it's all connected. And it just relates back to what's been said before about knowledge. It's about knowing your tenants. It's about understanding the communities that we serve. Victor, I just wanted to ask about something you said about holding up the mirror to housing associations. How do you hold up a mirror when there are so many people that are intent on just keeping their eyes firmly shut? As a young person of colour, I am always angry at the world. And I just want to sometimes, you know, shake people and say, come on, get what I'm saying. How do we hold up the mirror to those that just don't want to look at themselves? They don't want to look into themselves or look into their organizations. What advice would you give there?
Well, I mean, holding up the mirror, I mean, publish the data. But publishing the data, I think then when you got nowhere to hide, you become visible, right? So I think all we can do is play back what we're seeing, and the facts are the facts. And people then have to feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And the truth is, whilst change is happening slowly, more and more, you know, because when I said 67 or 68 chairs have signed, at Christmas, it was 50. You know, so, you know, what we need to do, I think, is continue to push the message, continue to hold the mirror, continue to make it an uncomfortable reality. Because I think in the end, as more and more people start to recognize they have a moral and professional responsibility at the board table, those people that are determined not to change will become the minority. And so I don't give up. I don't think any of us should give up. I think the level of discussion in our sector around EDI has definitely increased. And so our job is to continue to amplify and to continue to point at the numbers and continue to make people feel uncomfortable and ask questions. I think that's all we can do. And the other thing is this: don't get cross. Just do what you can do in the areas you can control and influence, because all of us can make a difference. And if all of us made a little difference, when we turn around, that's a lot of difference together. And so for those 68 organisations that signed, 2 or 3 years' time, change would have occurred. And those people that haven't, they will see that they're no longer they're not the norm anymore. And it won't be 68, it might be 100. What I'm saying is, I think we just have a responsibility to continue to make changes where we can influence, where we control. And I'm a born optimist, and I will continue to push for social justice, and I don't think any of us can ever assume this is going to be finished. Probably we have to pass it to someone else. That's the truth. But it doesn't make it, it doesn't make it unimportant. It doesn't mean we should give up. But I think we are making progress, 100% making progress on it.
But keep fighting and influence things. I respect that. Callum, what are the challenges facing the housing sector at the moment, especially with CIH at the moment, in terms of improving equality, diversity, and inclusion?
I think so. You and Victor have picked up on a couple there. Actually, the people feel they have no agency. So actually, if you feel the world's burning, if you feel there's injustice everywhere, then you can feel disempowered, probably a better word, and it can be frustrating. Actually, you don't know where to go. Where do you channel that? But actually, I think, as we've probably touched upon, but actually it's up to us to go and find that kind of passion, to find that energy, and to speak to people. Actually, there are CIH Futures, CIH, HDN, and that Fed. Actually, we are desperate, like absolutely desperate, to channel that kind of that passion, that energy, that enthusiasm, so we can build a better housing system. Because that's fun. That's what we're trying to do, isn't it? It's not because there's an innate goodness, although there is. Actually, we're trying to build a better housing system. We're trying to ensure that the services and the homes and everything we provide for tenants are more representative. Because, as Victor said at the start, actually, if you have more diverse workforces, if you have more, you've got better services, kind of more like happy communities, and that's what we're trying. So I think part of this is trying to be better about engaging with people, actually, to make them recognise, make them aware of the opportunities exist. And that's hard. That's hard for everybody. Tenant engagement's hard. Professional engagement's hard. I do think it is changing, though. I think Victor said in EDI, we have moved a lot in a short space of time. We've got a long, long way to go. But you think about, I'm mindful around movements on, say, gay rights. You think about where the UK was when I was a kid, and growing up in Scotland in the 80s and 90s. It was still the kind of a lot of prejudice. We had a kind of an informal referendum on Section 28 in Scotland, and there was a lot of support for keeping that in. And now, then 20 years later, the landscape's changed. Actually, and the attitudes towards some parts of EDI have absolutely kind of been transformed, but it hasn't been the same across other. There's still ingrained prejudices across other characteristics, and we need to create that environment. We need to create the context where there's allies everywhere, that people are fighting for each other's rights, people are supporting each other. And I think we are, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I don't want to say we're just on the precipice of, and it's all going to change overnight. That's naive, but we are feeling change. We are seeing change. It's up to us to continue to create the conditions so progress is maintained, because if it doesn't, it could easily fall back. And what does that look like? So it's the work we're all doing as part of that, but none of that's enough. It needs that kind of the army of hundreds and hundreds of housing professionals behind us. That's what it's going to take to mobilise us. But I think we are in a different place. In England, you have you're going to have in a couple of years, professional qualification requirements. We have discussion around housing professionalism. So actually, there's a recognition at a government level, right? We need certain standards from housing professionals. We need to be confident about the qualifications. And suddenly, if qualifications matter, what else matters? Does representation matter? Because it does. So what does that look like? And actually, how do you ensure we're getting the right people in? Because we don't talk about housing as a career in a thoughtful way. We don't career services. Again, I'm going to speak to Scotland. I can't speak to the rest of the UK. We don't go into schools and colleges and universities and talk about housing as a career in a systemic way. But if we did that, then suddenly we're talking to people about here's a job, as we all said again, here's a sector that matches your values. Here's a sector where it's people focused. Here's a sector where you can make a difference. Here's a sector that needs you. And then if we can mobilise that, if we can build on that, I think the successes we've had around the conversation, EDI and professionalism, actually, I think we can start to make real change over the next 5-10 years. It will be bumpy, it will be frustrating, but I think that's there. And I think the organisations here and everybody else who's interested, and I suppose that's the other great thing about the housing sector, it is an endless collaboration. There's enough problems that we can all take apart and try to solve them. No one has to own it on their own. I think there's enough allies and the supporters out there, and I think we can all got a place to work together to try and improve that. So I totally get you, Luke. I get why people are frustrated, but I think things. I agree, Victor. I think there's an opportunity, and I think there's a positivity. And I think that we need to create the frameworks for it. But I think it can get a hell of a lot better for the next 5-10 years.
On housing as a career of choice, that's one of CIH Futures Foundation. That's one of our foundations. That's what we want to do. We want young people to choose housing. I think we all said about falling into housing. We want it to be, we choose housing. We want housing to be our career. What can young people do to contribute towards the sector in a meaningful way when it comes to EDI? Maureen, do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, definitely, Luke. I'm just going to have to choose a few thoughts because, of course, I'm not the only person in the room. Can I just go back to about anger? You mentioned anger, Luke, earlier on. I think it would be, for me, it would be weird if you weren't angry at your time in life, a young person with energy. I think it's what you do with that. It's a kind of energy, isn't it? What you do with it, and not to allow anger to eat us up so we can't function. Because that's one lesson I've learned is as I've got older, you have to manage your energy. And one way of doing that to fight the good fight is to focus on what you can do rather than the things that you can't do, because it will bring you down. If you're empathetic and sympathetic and sensitive, it will. So to focus on what you can do, back yourself. A young person, a member of my family, talked about backing yourself. I think in our culture, I'll say Western culture or British culture, we often look to older people as if, you have to be old to be on the board and have 55 years of this, that, and the other. And there's a kind of disrespect to people who may bring something fresh and modern sometimes. And I would say that as a young person, if you're bringing fresh ideas, fresh thinking, have the confidence to follow that through. I might shock people and say, well, actually, 35 and under, you're not that young, you're an adult. You're a young adult, but you're not a teenager. And people should respect that. And I think there's something in the culture that's reflected in social housing, that somehow we have to be kind of a certain age to have credibility. And I think part of EDI is to turn those stereotypes on their head and be looking for talent. And it doesn't matter if someone's been in the sector 6 months or 60 years, if they've got something to bring, we should make it easy for them to bring to the table. And I guess part of my work is trying to find those barriers and help break them down. I think we get stuck. We're not always willing to change fast enough in a way that Victor spoke about. But I think there are things you can do on the individual level, on the staff network level, connect with people who are like-minded. I think that's very powerful, keeps you going. So connect, you're not on your own. I think Victor or Callum said that. To recognise that society moves, when we make progress, it's because groups of people have come together to make the change. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So I would say, don't give up. Use your anger constructively, because use that as energy. Reach out and connect with like-minded people and get educated on what we're doing. Get educated, understand the history of the sector that you're in, and understand it goes through cycles as well. So, and that's a personal responsibility. Your job can't teach you everything you need to know. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Maureen. Victor, any advice for young people?
I'm probably going to paraphrase Maureen in a slightly different way. I would say, first of all, Keep looking for a role, a career that you love. And if it's social housing, bingo, you've won the lottery, right? But equally, don't pretend, because this stuff matters. Don't pretend it's what you want to do because it pays the bill. Do stuff because you love it, because it gives you a sense of fulfillment. And if you're driven by other things, it sounds terrible. I say this to colleagues on their first day at Curo at their induction. I want you to come to Curo. This is what we do. This is how we do it with our values. And I hope this gives you a real sense of fulfillment. And it drives you. And it on a Sunday night, you look forward to coming in on a Monday morning, right? But I beg you to go and keep looking until that happens, because careers are long and you want to be fulfilled and have a real sense of achievement and purpose and real drive and ambition. So if it's not social housing, keep going. And it sounds perverse to say this, but that's your first question. Do you love this enough to really, really give all of it, yourself to all of it, and really excel? Because if you do, that's the starting point to joy and contentment. The second thing I'd say is this: no one's responsibility for your career other than you. Take responsibility for your career. Make sure you are clear what good looks like in 3-5 years' time, and then work for it. No one's going to give you nothing. Let me tell you, I'm going to ruin your life here if you don't know this, but no one gives you anything, right? You have to work hard. Whether you came from another country and your first language wasn't English, or whether you're born here, well, that's not what I was going to say, and go to Eton. I think you're probably guaranteed a career there. But the point I'm making, for most of us, nothing is given, right? So you have to work at it. That means you can't blame someone else. You just have to be very, very determined, have a strong work ethic, and not let the realities of the world, which is there'll be setbacks, get in front of your ambition to be self-fulfilled and achieve your career goals. People often see applying for jobs and not getting it as a setback. I've never had that problem. Do you know why? Because statistically, you're always likely not to get it, because there's one job. Normally, there's one job and loads of people, right? So what you got to do is you always have to learn from everything and not be ashamed of failure, because most people spend their entire life failing at stuff. And all of those failures lead to successes if we're determined enough. So there you go. 3 things, make sure you love what you do, take responsibility for your career, and work really, really hard, and don't be put off when things go wrong. Can I just on Callum's point about professionalism, I have a little niggle on professionalism, if I'm very honest. I'm slightly worried, and I think this has been well rehearsed, that actually it's going to work against EDI. And I'm worried that all of us, most of us, fall into social housing and we love it. What happens if you can't get into social housing because you ain't got the right qualifications? We've just shut the door on a whole bunch of diversity. So my slight concern is, I came into this sector 30 years ago by accident, right? And I came in because someone called Brian Queen, who was like some senior person in Chartered Institute of Housing, I think he might have been the president or something, right? He looked at me and said, that man knows nothing about social housing. He's come from London Underground, where he was a lift and escalator engineer, right? But man talks about caring for people and customer service, and he's got an attitude of service that I want in this sector. I'll train him and teach him all the skills, but he's got the right attitude. And my concern in framing professional standards is that we shut the door on attitude in favor of skill, and we need to resist that. Now, we're all bright enough to make sure that doesn't happen, but we can't walk ourselves into a situation where the only people that get the senior jobs are the people that have been around here forever, and now it's reinforcing a non-diverse senior team.
That's a really good point, especially in relation to qualifications. Not everybody I mean, for the level 4, it's sitting down, it's reading a bunch, and then it's writing an essay. Not everybody, even the most highly intelligent people, are capable of that sort of academic learning. So that is a really good point. Callum, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And I think Victor's point is absolutely reasonable, because actually what you have, one of the beautiful things about the sector is a bit like actually maybe the police force or football management. You've got this actually pathway often from like the absolute grassroots, the bottom of the ranks, to the top, that's actually incredibly well trodden. Not everybody gets there. I'm not saying, and there's more we can do to support that, but there is a path actually, and there's not a lot of sectors where you often see that. And I think that's right. I think we have to be really careful about creating barriers to entry, because actually, what do we do if we lose talent because people are, oh, I just, that's too much. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get involved in there. And but there's the other balance is we need to be professional as well. Not that we're not professional. I don't want to, but we also, it's important that we are committed to skills. We're committed to learning. We're continued to improvement. The sector and requirements on us change all the time, don't they? I mean, you're constant. You're like, my God, if everything could stand still for 20 minutes, then you'd actually get a sense of actually what you're supposed to do, but it doesn't. So the important thing that we need to do is continue to learn. We need to show that learning. And qualification requirements, we're not going to have them in Scotland. This is an England only thing. I think there's pros and cons for it. It's a kind of moment in time of qualification rather than a commitment to ongoing learning. And that's the bit where I think we really need to focus on, is actually being a housing professional it's not a piece of paper, like a bit working, but actually it's about how do we drive learning. We want to bring people in with the right values. Exactly, you're saying that, to right people with the right values and attitudes, because that is what makes them. Because I agree with you, if you've got the right attitudes, my God, do you know what? You can learn anything. Anything is learned. Like I was saying, I joined the sector 6 years ago. Now I'm apparently a leader in the sector in Scotland. Because do you know why? Because if you're interested, you're passionate about it, you can learn, you can get involved and do it, and that's the bit. So I don't think professionalism should be a barrier, but I recognise the risks, and I think you're right. We just have to be mindful about creating. We'll have in England these higher levels of qualification standards. If we're going, what we don't want to see is barriers to entry into the sector at all. If we are getting at the kind of grassroots level, housing officer level, where we're seeing barriers to entry because of requirements, I think that would be quite dangerous. We want to create standards. We want to give confidence to tenants, but actually the most important thing is that we want to be better at our job. And I would suggest that an ongoing commitment to things like CPD, and where we're purposefully learning in a dynamic, inclusive way, are better ways to show that, rather than having you need to have a CIH level 3 or level 2 or a kind of a certain qualification at other levels. We are where we are with the qualification requirement, but if we're committed to professionals, I think there's a lot of other ways we can go about that. And I think that's the exciting bit. I think that will help hopefully create opportunities for people as well. But we need to get people in the door. As well, we need to talk about housing as a career. We need to be more ambitious about the people. So we need to people who actually we can see the potential they've got. So that you would do. Not only we need you and you need us. Like, actually, this is going to be a perfect marriage. So let's get it. But I agree with Victor. I think that professionalism could go too far if we create too many barriers to entry, and it becomes a graduate profession, and that's not what we want. That's you lose. There's loads of other professions that have that, like brilliant. But let's not turn the sector into that. Let's make ourselves more professional, make ourselves more knowledgeable, skilled, everything like that. We don't want to become a kind of graduate class of kind of housing professionals. That's not what we're about.
Maureen?
Thanks, Luke. Can I just bring in a different angle around this? And that's about inequality, because we have people who are already qualified who still don't make it to the top of an organisation. So there's lots of statistics, even government statistics, for example, that there are sections of the population who tend to be overqualified for what they're already doing. And my concern is certain groups of our community are going to feel obliged to train even harder when that's not the issue. Professionalism for me has something to do with being managed properly, and no one's focused on management skill, line management skill. Professionalism is about skills. Like you said, it's about attitude. It doesn't mean because you have the qualifications that you have either of those. We have plenty of people who are very qualified in terms of academic qualifications, but in terms of their attitudes and behaviour, it falls short. So I don't think it guarantees the kind of mindset that we want in the housing sector. But I don't want us to fall down this rabbit hole of assuming that certain underrepresented groups are less qualified, because that's not true. Certainly when it comes to people of ethnically minoritized communities, the statistics say, especially when they're young, that they tend to be overqualified for the same position, be it housing, banking, but doesn't matter. Just that they tend to do more training as a way of trying to level the playing fields and get in. So my concern would be putting people feeling obliged to train even more, and still not being recognised for it, because we're not looking at the bigger picture, which is systemic and culturally driven. So I want to throw that in because in some respects things haven't changed, and we need to talk about that too.
Thank you. I certainly agree with a lot of those points made. We're almost towards the end. I'll just give us time for maybe a couple of closing remarks, stories, anecdotes, anything that everybody wants to say. We'll start with Victor.
Closing remarks. Look, I guess I'll leave you with a thought that I've said a couple of times, which is about our own personal responsibility in this journey around inclusion. And yesterday, someone at the conference said, one of the most important things is to have someone that inspires you, that mentors you, is your sponsor. So try and find someone like that, someone that will be your cheerleader as well as someone that will support you through your career. And the other piece of advice he said, which I thought was really good, which was you have to manage your line manager. Don't be silent, use your voice. And in both those regards, I think they're really good bits of advice for people that are trying to develop their career and they want to contribute to solving what is, quite frankly, an unacceptable situation of a gross lack of diversity at the senior levels in our sector. But it all falls on each of us taking responsibility. It's not a thing, it's an individual endeavor that collectively makes a difference.
Callum?
I mean, I absolutely agree with what Victor said there. I think it's you taking responsibility for your own career, your own life, your own passions, your own ambition is because it won't be handed to you. And it's not just, I think about my own career, it's not and I still, who knows what I'll do next after this, but it's not just about taking opportunities, it's about creating opportunities, because you might not always get the recognition in a role, but you know what? You will learn a lot. You will learn so much, and it'll put you, when it comes to that interview that you're doing next, because you have taken that initiative, you'll be able to demonstrate to that, and people will see that. They'll see your passion. You'll see it, because I think they're the people we all want to work with. People who have initiative. People who want to are in the hurry. And they make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. But the thing that I guess frustrates us all is that when we've had 2 or 3 meetings about the same thing, is that I thought this was done, and we moved. That ability to take initiative, that passion, and that drive for change is, if you've got it, my God, this is a sector for you. This is absolutely where you should be. Hold on to that, and don't let that spark be kind of crushed. Actually, kind of find the role, find the people that actually can help you to grow in that, and you'll get an amazing career. The other thing I would say is help us. Do you know what? As a selfish pitch for CIH, might join us, because actually, as I said at the beginning, we are very honest about how little we know, and if there's more that we can and should be doing, come and help us help you, because actually that is the point of it. We will only exist if people want us to exist, because if the members don't want it, then we're not here, and that's fine, because obviously we've done our job or we're no longer required. But if you think there's a purpose for us, but you think we could do better, then absolutely come and help. Please do focus on your own career, but we'll help you as well.
Thank you. Noreen?
Yeah, shameless plug for HCN on the back of what Callum said for CIH is check out whether or not your organisation is a member of HCN. And because I work for HCN, I've had the opportunity of being here today. And I think that's powerful, because if you're not networked in, then you're not visible. So make sure your organisation's a member, and then find out what you can be attached to. There's loads of stuff going on, as well as at the CIH, at HCN, the stuff you can get involved in. We have a board diversity conference next month, and we're looking for speakers there are some wicked opportunities if you stick your neck out to grab, and you can do it in non-traditional ways. So focus on your career if that's the thing you want, but also think about the other kind of opportunities that could be available because you're just active in the sector, a bit like everybody here today, and make some really powerful connections. I would also say be the change you want to be. I think being an example. So if you can't solve everything, at least behave the way that you would like the world to be, and you can also influence and lead people in that way and be an ally. You don't have to be that group or the other group to make progress for everybody. I'm more than happy for, I don't know, whatever group to make progress because it helps everybody. So be an ally for another group and be an example otherwise, and connect up with HDN. You heard it here, Housing Diversity Network.
Thank you so much. Wow, that is all we've got time for today. I could have kept this going for another 30 minutes, but it is a Friday afternoon after all. Thank you so much to my guests, Victor, Noreen, Callum. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for so much food for thought. It's really appreciated. A shameless plug as well for CIH Futures. Follow us on LinkedIn here as well. But yeah, thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.